What up, everybody? It's your boy Kentarion. I'm back again for another episode of Christ and Comic Books, and today we are doing our review of the series known as Supernatural, which is one of the biggest hitting series in America for the sci-fi genre. And today we're going to be continuing like what we always do, giving a Christian perspective on this series. And of course, just so you guys know, if you like this type of content where we're giving a Christian perspective, analyzing what either Christians should watch out for or what Christians can take away from the series, shows, movies, anime, manga, comic books that they are reading, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell so that you guys can get a heads up on my upcoming videos. Not only that, so that we are boosting the algorithm, please make sure that you're hitting that like button as well as leave some comments. Let me know what you guys think of the theories and the perspectives given in this video. That way we can have more things to talk about, and I'll make sure to do my best to respond. Now, as we dive into our review of the series of Supernatural, I'm going to go ahead and point out for you guys that the series was created by a man known as Eric Kripke. He was inspired by what I believe to be either a series or a book known as American Gods to create this heavy-hitting sci-fi genre. And in doing so, what he wanted to create was something that would be a bit dark, a bit gritty, playing again off of what we already see in this series of this sibling relationship and them overcoming the trials that they encounter. Now, let's give some backstory of the series of Supernatural. One, for those, of course, that already know the series, to get hyped because they love it so much, and even more so for anyone that hasn't watched it, but has either considered it or had some reservations. This is to kind of help you know what you're getting into with this series. So, Supernatural is about two brothers known as Sam and Dean Winchester, who travel across country dealing with the terrors of the night. Monsters, to simplify this topic, making sure that they are not taking human lives to the best of their ability. If they identify that someone's life has been taken in an unusual or strange way, they go to check it out and make sure to find out what the monster is and kill it, so that it is no longer wreaking havoc in the area where it has caused some trouble. Now, how did this story begin? The story began with John and Mary Winchester. They had just had their second son, who is Sam, and in them having had their second son, they had just put him down for the night, and Mary goes to check up on Sam. But in going to check up on Sam, she ends up being attacked by this man that is seen to be hovering over the crib of Sam. She is attached to the ceiling of the room and set ablaze. As John comes to check on what's going on, he sees his wife burning on the ceiling. He goes to grab his son Sam, him and Dean, they go outside. He goes to try and save his wife, but his attempts failed. The house burns down, and the three have to leave this home. But in this instance, John is convinced that something else has taken place other than a natural house fire that led to the death of his wife and this attack on his family, revealing that there are monsters that terrorize people, demons, werewolves, vampires. All of these things do in fact exist. And so he becomes a hunter, thus training his sons, Sam and Dean, to become hunters as well, to again combat these night terrors. But in John's obsession to avenge his wife, he is in pursuit of who actually killed his wife to take out this revenge. So where it could be perceived that he's operating as a hero, he's actually a man driven to revenge. Now, due to the way that John has brought up his sons Sam and Dean, this has had an effect on them as characters who are the main protagonists that we're watching in this series. You see, the way that John has thus brought up Sam and Dean has impacted them as they are the protagonists in this series. So, of course, as Sam is looking to pursue his own desires of, hey, I'm going to go get an education instead, Dean comes back on orders from his father John to, hey, bring your brother back in. We have work to do. We're closing in on the demon that killed your mom. So they end up bringing Sam back into the fold. We will get into the details of how that was built up onto. But he's brought back into the fold, and the two journey across country in their father's car, a 1976 Chevy Impala, of course coated in black, which they constantly end up having to repair after several encounters with several different types of enemies.
Hey, you leave my baby alone. She's got nothing to do with this.
But this is where our story begins, with these two brothers going to kill monsters. Now, in their venture to deal with these monsters, they encounter several different types, as I mentioned before. They go from vampires, werewolves, dealing with mythological creatures either associated with different folklore across America or folklore across different religious beliefs and other cultures to make sure to take them out. We, of course, do have ghosts as well in this story, witches, and demons. But the story, although it started out with the top threat being demons, it grows to the point where they have to contend with angels. And even more so, they end up even having to contend with God himself, which we will talk about near the end of this video. Alright, this next phase of this video, we're going to be talking about the brothers, specifically Sam and Dean Winchester. And we're going to be doing a little mentioning of Castiel as well. Castiel being a high-valued angel in the series that fans seem to have fallen in love with, and we can't seem to get rid of. That is a pun on the fact that anytime any character in this series dies that's loved, they get resurrected one way or another. So let's look at the brothers Sam and Dean. Sam and Dean, Sam being the younger brother, Dean being the older. Dean operates as the one that is really close to his father. He also had a relationship with his mother. So the impact of what took place in their home when he was a child, he was aware of. So he has more of a closeness to the drive that his father has. Hence why he continues on the path of being a hunter as well. That's why he doesn't pursue anything different, because he sees the necessity of this hunting that takes place almost to an obsessive state. But he sees the necessity of it, which is why he constantly pursues it. Now, some of the aspects of Dean as a character is he's one that doesn't pursue anything for himself. He doesn't see the point, because things are going to happen that are either going to lead to the harm of people that he actually cares about, or it's going to take away from him having time for him to have a normal life. So in him grasping this concept, he tries his best not to develop close relationships. There are points in the series where that does in fact happen, but what he fears ends up happening as well, leading to him wanting to reduce again the relationships that he has with people. Not only that, this also keeps him from knowing exactly what he personally wants for himself. He's simply satisfied with the driving from hotel to hotel life. Let me make sure that I have a beer, some burgers in hand, and my life is good. And some ladies on the side as well. As long as I can enjoy the little things in life, I'll be okay. As long as I can keep people safe, I'll be okay. Now, of course, his mental state is strongly challenged throughout the entirety of the series. And when I say challenged, I mean challenged from experiences with PTSD. Again, they die and they come back. That has an effect on you. Encounters with several different types of monsters, demons, gods, having new relationships, all of these things have really truly have scarred the mentality of this character, but it's also something that draws fans to this character. Now, something else to point out as well is his brother Sam. Sam, again, is the younger brother. Sam, being that younger brother, being that he was a baby when everything took place with his mother, he didn't have that relationship with her. The only thing he knows is he's being brought up to be a hunter. He's been told about his mother, but he doesn't have that relationship to drive him to continue to be a hunter like Dean and John do. And so, he was wanting more out of life. That is why, at a certain point in the series, he ends up running away, finishing getting his education, going as far as going to college. But in him attempting to go to college, he ends up in a relationship, and the woman that he's in a relationship with, I believe her name was Jessica at the time, she ends up suffering the same death that his mother did. Again, he wasn't there for that, but he's been told the stories. And after having had that experience, what meant to him was the same thing that killed my mom had to have killed Jessica. But he's now driven by the death of Jessica to go and figure out what's happening, and again, pursuing revenge to kill whatever it is that is doing this to him and his family. So this is where it leads to him joining the fray. But he's constantly illustrated as this person that's extremely empathetic. He's thinking, maybe we can stop this from happening to anybody else. Maybe we can get there before something bad happens. He's trying to understand the situation and not simply going guns blazing like Dean normally does. He is also the type of character to sit down and do his research before he goes in to try and deal with the threat, so that the right weapons are on hand to deal with whatever threat this may be. Sadly, to point out about his character, he's also the main one to get knocked out whenever anything happens. I promise you, if you watch you watch the first 10 seasons, you're constantly seeing Sam get knocked out by one monster or another, snuck up on back of the head, tied up. He has like a trademark expression for every time he wakes up after getting hit in the head. It's weird. I'm gonna try and do it, so don't laugh at me. It's like, that's the face he made. I probably did a horrible job of it. So Sam that's the character of Sam, which is this is a very interesting aspect for him, which show these two brothers to be extremely different, but they also, again, have the same goal in mind. But it brings a balance to their relationship in the essence of how they're able to take down their threats. You have the one person that's smart and does the research. You have the other person who's strong and willing to jump at the chance at risking his life to make sure things get done. So that relationship is what fans always loved about the series. And it also covers different people's perspectives. If this type of reality actually exists, it's covering the different perspectives. You're going to have people that are traumatized by what they went through, and they're going to want to pursue getting, we're going to deal with this problem point blank period. We don't want to talk about it. I'll hide my feelings. This is Dean's mindset. Then you have people like Sam. We got to talk about what happened. That way we can grow together and build a stronger bond. I don't want to leave you by yourself. Let me help you. That's Sam, as well as, we don't have to do this for the rest of our life. There is a way out. Sam tries to constantly perpetuate that throughout the entirety of the series. Now, this is going to allude to the tie-in, again, like I said, there are angels and demons in this series. And something to point out that Eric Kripke pointed out as well, that in his original design of how the story would flow, he wanted it to be to where it wasn't simply that Sam and Dean are just showing up to face the threat. They're actually involved as a part of what could be the threat. So something that is later revealed, again, to get into more of that backstory, Sam is a vessel, being trained up to be a vessel for Lucifer, aka Satan, to come take over at the point of the end times, or as the series titles it, the apocalypse. He's being trained up to be the vessel. So this demon, known as a yellow eyes demon, comes and plants his demon blood into Sam. This is to start a path to him pursuing demon blood for more power, but two, making him a strong enough vessel that when Lucifer comes, Lucifer possesses him, and he'll be able to withstand being possessed by Lucifer. Because again, with Lucifer being so strong, it's necessary for the vessel to be strong enough to maintain him. Now, on the opposite side, similar plays are happening with Dean as well. Not as much as, well, we got to get the vessel ready, but that the vessel is already prepared enough, as he is the vessel for Michael. So in the end times, the final battle is supposed to be Michael going against Lucifer with these two brothers whose vessels are good enough so that these two can come together and have this final battle. So they also play off Revelation's apocalyptic ending as well, and utilizing that in this story. And then earlier on parts of the series, yes, God is mentioned, but God is not physically manifested immediately and utilized throughout the flow of this story. But he is referenced to constantly. Again, we'll get to that here at the end, near the end of the video. So with that being the case, these two are truly fully invested and involved in the actual storyline of the series of Supernatural, and which is what is a drawing piece for these two brothers. Now you're probably wondering, okay, wait, what about Castiel? That's where Castiel comes into the flow of things. Castiel shows up as an angel, and an obedient angel at that, or attempting to be. He's trying to fulfill what God wants done for the apocalypse to flow the way it needs to. He's a good soldier. That's how he's always operated and has always perceived himself, and other angels have always perceived him that way as well. He does what God wants him to do. He does what needs to be done for heaven, and he tries to fulfill his role. And so he in part begins to be introduced as the one who, like I said, they die a lot, as Dean has been ripped apart by a hellhound, which is a demon dog. He is the one that pulls Dean out of hell. And so in pulling Dean out of hell, this is how he gets involved in the story. He's trying to push these two along to fulfill their role and their purpose, mainly helping Dean rather than helping Sam become Lucifer. But everyone wants to stop the devil, right? So he's trying to, of course, combat the devil. He's trying to get Dean to become Michael. But here's something that's significant about the character of Castiel. That's a drawing piece. One, Castiel, as in name, is not an actual name.
No, God!
As far as what people have known throughout history to be an actual angel's name. This was specifically made up for the series. So in essence, Castiel is his very own character. And the way he flows is going from being that good soldier angel to being one that is curious about the behavior of humanity, to becoming one that loves humanity. And so he becomes that one that values people and loves people and kind of acts dopey a lot of times, which is another comedic and an attractive thing that he does as a character that really draws people in and makes people want to see more of Castiel. So it's one of those things you really end up loving about him and watching his character development, and in a lot of cases destruction, because you start to feel bad. But that's a lot of what happens throughout this series. Now, something else that I want to kind of touch on a bit more too is the death cycle that these guys go through. I mean, so you had Dean died. When Dean died, Dean went to hell. And when Dean was in hell, he was trained up by a demon as to how to torture people. So that's where you get that psychological damage I mentioned earlier. That's that PTSD he suffers. And sadly, he has also retained the skills from that torture. And so that's something that has affected him. Sam has died countless times. Notably, he died at one point, which we'll go into more detail later, but he dies at one point after having been possessed by Lucifer. He is sent into the cage, which is known as the place where they keep Lucifer locked up, which is where he was freed from, but they get him back in, thanks to Sam and Dean. He gets locked back in the cage, but Sam's body is there with him. And of course, what these brothers do alongside Castiel and with the notable Bobby and several other characters, they work together to constantly resurrect one another. Dean works to resurrect Sam. Sam works to resurrect Dean. Sometimes they're just resurrected out of nowhere and no one understands why they've been resurrected. See, Castiel resurrected Dean. When Sam came back, there was no explanation. No one knew how Sam came back. Sam came back, however, without his soul. So then Dean ventures to bring back his soul. But his soul is so damaged from Lucifer torturing his soul that they have to fix his soul. There's a whole lot of pieces to the way that everything plays out in this series that's just like, what? They did all of this? They went through all of this? And it's overwhelming. I'm not even going to lie to you. It's overwhelming. Alright, so we're going to move on past these characters. Let's talk a little bit about what they use. And I only say this to kind of point out some things that may be of concern to the Christian community when it comes to the series of Supernatural. So they, of course, use, their regular guns to combat these monsters. They use machetes for cutting off the heads of vampires. They use silver bullets and silver knives to deal with werewolves. They use salt rounds to deal with ghosts, which makes them go away temporarily. When dealing with ghosts, they use what's known as salt rounds to, of course, ward them away, but then they have to figure out what their spirit is tied to get rid of that thing. Normally it's a body, but otherwise it could be an item, but they make sure that they get rid of that. Now, this expands to when it comes to dealing with demons, that they originally had them to where they had to put a seal on the ground to capture them and hold the demon in place, and they would read off an exorcism to cast the demon out of the body of the person that they were trying to help.
You gonna read me a story?
Something like that. Hit it, Sam.
Regna terre, cantate Deo, salite Domino. Qui ferter super celum.
An exorcism.
De ecclesiae, terrogamus audinos, mirabilis Deus, de sanctuario tuum Deus Israel. Ipse tribuet virtutem et fortitudinem levi sue, benedictus Deus, gloria patri.
Now this levels up in several ways, one of which they get a knife from a witch, or excuse me, from a demon who used to be a witch. So much is happening that they can now use to immediately just stab the person that's being possessed by a demon to kill them immediately, without having to go through the hassle of the seal and the exorcism and things of that nature. Now you might be asking, it's like, okay, well, wouldn't they rather save the person's life? One thing that's revealed later, not knowing the extent of the damage that the demon has put the actual vessel through, if the demon leaves the body, that vessel will return all of the damage it once suffered, thus leading to that person dying immediately once the demon is cast out. So that just kind of leads to, well, we'll just put them out of their misery kind of concept. That's kind of what this ends up leading to. They even grow to the point of them working with spells and witchcraft and things of that nature to deal with certain threats, combining the proper things to deal with mythological creatures, either from folklore or from other religions. They require specific type of items to be killed. They go to the extent of getting their hands on what's known as angel blades, which I actually thought was a neat concept, being that the angel blade is made simply for piercing and not for cutting, and so it can not only kill angels, but it can also kill demons, and of course kill most of any other entity, mid to low level threat that the team generally deals with. So sadly, they've killed several angels, getting their hands on a lot of angel blades and taking them out that way. I think with them creating it in that piercing fashion, it really does play on the scripture that says that the word is sharper than any two-edged sword. Kind of speaking on, and when I say that the word isn't necessarily a two-edged sword, but it's more powerful than a two-edged sword. So it can be of a different form or a different shape, which gives it some of its own individual power. So for the angels to use the angel blade is a pretty interesting concept. They also do get their hands on holy water, which brings, I guess you could say, a Christian religious Catholic, I can't get the words out, a Catholic view to this approach also, which brings some peace of mind, but not entirely, because like I said, they'll go as far as using witchcraft to do what they need to do, even though they hate witches and kill them too. Just a short disclaimer, everyone, that as we continue with this video, we're going to be hitting on particular seasons in the show that I think would be crucial to talk about, as well as give a Christian perspective on. One, to highlight some specifics, but two, not to disclose the entirety of the series. Because if you really want to know what's happening in this series, if you really care that much to know the details, watch the show. Okay? Just watch the show. And I don't want to be one to just ruin the entirety of the series for anyone, but we are going to talk about a couple of arcs. And so if you'll join me in this journey as we discuss 3 arcs: the Apocalypse arc, the Darkness arc, as well as the final arc where God is the bad guy. Okay? So in this first arc that we're going to discuss, the Apocalypse arc. So again, this Apocalypse arc is, just as I say it, is them fulfilling what takes place in Revelation, with the 2 brothers becoming the vessels for Lucifer and Michael, so that they can have their final battle where Michael's supposed to win, but the brothers don't want to handle it that way because it means sacrificing each other or killing each other for this to happen. So as I was saying before, Sam ends up drinking demon blood, training his vessel up to be able to be prepared to take on Lucifer. Now, he wasn't consciously doing this. He wasn't trying to help Lucifer get out. What he thought he was doing was making himself strong enough to deal with the top tier demons that him and his brother had constantly been encountering, that they had been struggling with dealing with. He thought he was being made strong to deal with them. In fact, he's been being deceived to make him a vessel for Lucifer. So when Lucifer is finally released, thanks to Sam, they are whisked away, believed to be by the work of God, to ensure that he isn't immediately being possessed. So they come together to plan to how are we going to bring him down. Now, in this being the Apocalypse arc, what they do is they play on several different instances from Revelations, one of which to highlight is the horsemen that show up. And so for them to be able to effectively get rid of Lucifer, which the plan is to reseal him as he has escaped, they need the rings from the horsemen, and in combining the rings, they make a gate where they're hoping to cast Lucifer into the pit. And so the best way that they can think of to do that is for Sam to be able to be possessed, sadly, and cast himself into the pit. So in their first attempt to fulfill that plan, it fails, because Lucifer officially takes over Sam, where Sam thought he'd be strong enough to hold him off long enough to throw himself in, but that plan fails. Now, in the midst of this whole season, a third brother is revealed named Adam. Now, you might be asking, well, why was Adam revealed? Adam is revealed because Dean absolutely refuses to be possessed. So Dean, in refusing to be possessed by Michael, his brother Adam ends up becoming a vessel for Michael. What makes him qualified? He comes from the same lineage as John, which is enough qualification for the angels to impart him into Adam. And this was what leads to their final bout. But instead of, again, because they don't want it to result in them just being destroyed, they want to make sure that Lucifer is put away. They go to this place, they throw the rings down, their plan starts to fail because although they ward off Michael, they weren't able to ward off Lucifer. Lucifer ends up brutally damaging one of the hunters known as Bobby. He ends up killing Castiel, but in him distracting Sam, as Sam had beaten up his brother Dean so brutally. It was one of the hardest scenes to watch, watching Sam beat down on Dean. But in this moment, he is now able to take back over his body just for a brief second. So in taking back over his body, he uses enough of that strength to attempt to throw himself into the pit. In doing so, he is also caught up by Adam, who is like, hey, we need to continue this battle. He's like, no, but instead both brothers fall into the pit, going back into Hell's Cage, where Lucifer and Michael, with their vessels, are now there, supposedly for eternity, but it doesn't play out that way. They come back. So, that's how this battle plays out. So the end, the revelation ending that's prophesied in the Bible does not happen because these two brothers work together to stop it. Now, that in and of itself could be an immediate frustration for Christians because, Revelation is going to happen. Jesus is going to come back. Jesus is going to come and he's going to reign over the world. But that's not how the story plays out. Jesus doesn't show up. Talk about that more later. Instead, we get these brothers stopping everything. And again, that is immediate frustration because we don't want to make the word of God a lie. The word of God speaks of the impending outcome of the world, even more so the outcome of those that believe in Jesus. So for them to twist that story and make it something different is something to cause huge concern. Some other things that also cause huge concern that happen within this arc is that not only are the demons the bad guys, the angels are illustrated in some sense to be bad as well.
Boy, if you don't get...
Although they are ones that operate to be obedient to what God intends for things to happen, they don't have that love of humanity that God has for humanity, or they're supposed to have for humanity according to biblical expectation or biblical teaching. These angels simply want to use humans to do what they're supposed to do, and that's it. They don't care how they have to go about it. And that is a misconception about the perspective of angels of God about humanity. It makes them come across as corrupt and evil as the demons themselves. Granted, demons are fallen angels, which is some other details there too. Another thing about the angels that I would say is somewhat concerning, not a major red flag, just a little bit concerning, is the angels need a vessel. However, according to how the Bible illustrates angels when they interact or encounter human beings, they don't possess human bodies to do these things. Now, to kind of counteract that, they do a great job of having the angels be ones to get permission from whoever it is that they're taking the vessel of. They basically speak a purpose into that individual, and then that individual welcomes the angel into them for them to, again, fulfill said purpose. Now, that brings some value to that behavior, but it then still takes away from how we entertain angels unaware. We encounter angels and they're observing our behaviors without us even knowing. So that kind of robs us of that if they're becoming the vessel of someone that someone actually does know. So that kind of takes that away. And even more so, they go as far as with the aspect of the demons, that demons that aren't fallen angels, but they're humans that end up being corrupted after a certain period of time in hell. Now, there are some demons that are just the fallen angel aspect, because like they have that with the yellow eyes demons and the elite soldiers of Lucifer, but they're otherwise not specifically illustrated as demons per se. They're just fallen archangels. So that's something to keep in mind that is questionable that they do in the series. The next season for us to look at here as we're reviewing the series of Supernatural is the Ark of the Darkness. Now, this doesn't happen until way later in the series of season 11, but to simply tell you what's happening here, God's sister is revealed in this ark. So let me give you some background. How do we get to this point? So, in this instance, as to not go deep into that because we'll be here all night long, Dean ends up taking the mark of Cain. As we know from Genesis, they will receive a mark if anyone comes against Cain after he was exiled for killing Abel. So Dean takes on that mark. He takes on that mark, of course, to get more power, but that mark has a corrupting side that results in an insatiable desire to kill. So at this point, where they have, of course, dealt with their threat, they don't want for Dean to end up becoming a demon like he had before. And again, this is due to the mark. They were able to save him. Watch the show if you want to know. But they were able to save him. And so instead of him falling back into becoming that demon, he decides instead, I'm going to go speak to the embodiment of death himself to see if he can do something with me that rids me from anyone's presence, so that I'm not at risk of killing anyone that I love, or I'm not at risk of going crazy with killing and becoming a demon. He wants to get sent like to the moon or to Mars somewhere or to a different universe to make sure that this doesn't happen. But between this conversation with him and death, Sam shows up in this very moment to stop Dean. Now, here's what they're playing off of in this instance, just to highlight it real quick. Sam and Dean are playing off of the concept of the Cain and Abel relationship, where they, yes, are very close and they love each other so very much. At the same time, they find themselves constantly butting heads. This is playing off of Cain and Abel. And in this moment, Sam, being overwhelmed by the mark, goes to almost kill Sam, using Death's scythe itself. Now, what happens in this moment, in the background, is Sam had been working with a witch by the name of Rowena to come up with a way, using a very ancient dark spellbook, to remove the mark of Cain from him. She finally fulfills the spell, removing the mark from him, and instead, Dean goes and he kills Death itself. He ends up killing Death. And so in killing Death, this doesn't start this, but a dark cloud envelops the city that they are in. So what does this reveal? This reveals that although the mark of Cain caused this insatiable desire to kill, the mark of Cain was also a seal to keep locked away the darkness, aka God's sister. Now, to give more background, why was this the case? So the relationship between these two was just as any other siblings, brother and sister. You know, they don't get along too well. The thing is, God would attempt to create things, but his sister, the darkness, would come and destroy these things. And that's how she began to get this tale. But here's the thing with that. There's a bit of a deception from God telling the story this way. I forgot to mention, God shows up in the series, guys.
No! God, please, no!
So God has a physical representation in this story, especially as the sister has been revealed, right? So he becomes physically manifested. And so he ends up needing the help of Sam and Dean to stop the darkness, whom it's their fault that the darkness got out, but they end up needing his help. So to give some background on the relationship between the darkness and God, these two were brother and sister, where God would be one to create things, and the darkness would be the one to come and destroy those things that he would create. At least that's the tale that God would tell of his sister. That's the thing that's been hidden throughout history that barely anyone could get their hands on, is that she's the corrupt one, destroying everything that I create. When that's not necessarily the case, it's really that she was looking for some love and attention from her brother that she wasn't getting. And because he spent more of his time with what he was creating, she decided, well, I'll destroy what you create until you can pay attention to me. But being that she has been locked up for thousands of years, this has built up a resentment on her part against God. So she goes out not only to want to destroy what God has created, but now I'm going to destroy my brother. So in the character of God now having been revealed in the series, they give him the name of Chuck. And even more so, as I continue with this video, I will only address him as Chuck. I will not call him God. He don't get a big G with the way the story goes out. I'll reveal to you later why, but he don't get a big G. So we're going to sit here. We're going to go forward with Chuck. So Chuck coming against his sister, and him and his sister having this battle. There's a plan to gather all the soldiers of God, witches and other people that have powers, his archangels. Lucifer's out of the cage and is agreed to help. Castiel's here. So they're combining the power of heaven as well, the power of demons, to try and defeat the sister of God. Now, that is I hate to say how frustrating that is. I'll get into that aspect here shortly. But so in their attempts, they fail to defeat her. She ends up fatally wounding God. And in her fatally wounding God, anything that God has created is going to die away. So as God is slowly dying, the earth is dying. And so they come up with one final ditch effort to just self-destruct Dean, to destroy her. Because of the mark, her and Dean have a close relationship somewhat. She's able to let Dean in somewhat. And so on the backhand, she ends up observing humanity in a quiet garden. And in observing humanity in this quiet garden, she somewhat regrets what she has done. She sees some value in what her brother has been creating. More so a value in those things rather than the value in her brother and his behavior. And so as Dean comes and sees what's happening with her, he gives this valuable speech that then changes her perspective. She then ends up healing her brother, and they whisk away to enjoy a vacation, rekindling their brother and sister relationship going forward, thus saving the earth once again. Now, let's get into some Christian concerns with this. And it's hard to know where to start with this. Let's start with the sister. God doesn't have a sister. Period. There's no twisting that. There's no, manipulating this to make it a what-if story or it's a nice idea. God doesn't have a sister. Okay? So let's go ahead and dispel that now. That's something that is, personally, as a believer in God, that's somewhat hurtful for them to go to that extent. But they also are playing off of this harmonious relationship between the two. But when you're at this point in season 11, that's not necessarily what's given. Thus, you don't necessarily think that way at this point. So because they don't allude to that, it's really just giving God a rival or someone of his own at his same power level. That's unnecessary. And even more so to illustrate this as God needing help. He doesn't need help. He may want help. He may like to see us partner with him to do great things. But him needing help to deal with evil, it's not the case. Especially for them to go as far as to illustrate this as God working with angels, demons, witches, and using magic to try and deal with a supernatural threat of some sort. God doesn't need that. God wouldn't want that because he does not accept demons. He does not accept witchcraft. Those things are not of God, and we shouldn't act like God is just going to pardon those things simply to do something greater. And in that essence, he would in another aspect, but not in this aspect. So that somewhat is extremely frustrating for them to depict it in that way. To depict as everything is acceptable by God. It's not. And I wouldn't even lie to myself to think that that is the case. So those are some huge concerns from this. Even more so, God being wounded to where he'll die. God is an eternal being. So no matter what you do in a show, in a movie, you can't illustrate to where God's about to die. I know that they've tried to play on a couple of aspects of this in the series of Lucifer itself. Yes, I've watched that. I'm somewhat in and out of it. It's not that as good. It's not that good as people say it is. Only because of people like that rebellious nature. People are drawn to that. People are drawn to, seeing that the evil is not so evil. People are drawn to that. But again, that's why I like the way anime and manga portray it versus the way that they're portraying it for these series. So let us move on to the actual final season where God is evil is the perspective given here. So as we go into this, I want to be able to point out two key things that will build up to this end result. That way everything starts to make a little bit more sense. And so with the character of Lucifer going in and out of the cage, they end up bringing him back, like I said, for that last arc when he was contending with the darkness, and him being back and God leaving again. Lucifer, in some sense, had found some level of purpose. There's a lot of context missed here, but again, if you really want to know, watch the series. So, in essence, he wanted to find some level of purpose. Along the way of trying to find this purpose, he's still being evil, still killing people killing people relentlessly. So, I mean, that nature of him continues to happen. It comes to one point where he ends up possessing someone, sleeping with someone, and in doing so, this causes the birth of a Nephilim. And this Nephilim is being powered by an archangel. And so that is a huge powerhouse. And this leads to the birth of a character known as Jack. Now, of course, evil is trying to get their hands on him, but inevitably, Jack ends up going with, partnering with, and eventually becoming a part of the Winchester family. Now, Jack is a character that at first was questionable because, again, he's the son of the devil. So if he's the son of the devil, then there's evil in him. Like, that's the perspective that's given at first. There's a huge fear. But the angel Castiel believed that there was something more to him. Mainly because the human mother of Jack believed that there was more to him. So they go to try and influence change and growth to do better and wanting to help humanity versus giving into the nature of his father, which is extremely destructive. They have that influence on Jack, which also leads to Jack becoming an extremely beloved character on the level, if not more than, Castiel. It's arguable. We could debate that, right? But Jack has that innocence about him, so it's extremely drawing and attractive for fans as well. So a lot of people really love the character of Jack. But with this introduction of a Nephilim into the story, he ends up losing his soul at some point. And in losing his soul, the self-control he once had is no longer there. Even more so, he ends up imposing his will on humanity. I am paraphrasing how that happens. You'll have to watch it to find out. But he imposes his will on humanity. This gets the attention of God himself. And this getting the attention of God, God comes to the Winchester boys to deal with Jack. Now, this causes some confliction between the family of Sam, Dean, and Cass, as they Dean would rather kill him after what he did. Watch the show to find out. But Sam and Castiel would rather somewhat work together to ensure that they save Jack. So that causes some complications between them. But in the end, we got Dean at point blank range of killing Jack. But in this moment, God shows up to witness it happen. And they start to realize, hold on, God's out here manipulating the way that this goes. God is entertained by us going to do this when there's actually an opportunity where something different could happen. This doesn't have to be the end of Jack. Come to find out that God is actually influencing and manipulating the outcomes that these brothers have experienced, that several humans, that the angels, that the demons, that Jack is experiencing. God is the one is influencing all of this. And in them understanding that now, they're like, no, we don't want to do this for you, God. We're not going to do this. Thus causing them to rebel against God. Some other keynotes to go ahead and point out as well is what else is revealed is that there is a multiverse. There are several universes that God has created. This isn't revealed at this point, but it's already made known between season 12 and up to season 15 that there are multiple universes. Come to find out that in this moment, that what God was actually doing was simply trying to write a good story. That's it. Now, in one season, they illustrate this in a positive way, almost like he's doing a creative writing and making something that's amazing out of your life. Like they illustrate it in that way. But now it's gone to this, like, I just want to be entertained. And God's now not entertained. And his biggest entertainer being Sam and Dean. So those other universes failed because God had constantly been trying to make the perfect story using Sam and Dean, that he left those universes alone and made this one. Now he has this Sam and Dean, and he's, again, trying to get the best entertainment out of these two boys that he can get. And now that they've rebelled against him, he says, well, fine, screw it. I'll destroy all the universes. And he goes on a spree, destroying all of those other universes, and then finally ends to want to come back and destroy their main universe. Now this causes some trouble between the brothers because with these brothers, they don't know how to maintain hope. That's their struggle in this instance, is maintaining their hope. You know, are we still going to be able to pull this off? How can we hope to defeat God in another sense? What's the purpose of my life if all this time I've just been doing what God's wanted me to do? Who am I? So that becomes a huge inner turmoil for these two brothers as they go through the rest of this season. Even more so, them also having lost Jack in this instance, as God has immediately killed Jack due to their rebellion. They wonder, what is our hope? What can we do? Long story short, because again, watch the show, Jack comes back, and Jack coming back, he is being utilized, juiced up, and powered up to be able to contend with God, which again was the concern with God and the Nephilim existing in the first place, is that they would be on par, if not more powerful than God. So in the midst of them making a plan to deal with God, a couple of plans have failed along the way. But due to one of their plans backfiring, it resulted in an enormous change in the power set of Jack, to where Jack is able to absorb the divine power of God. The final battle ends with Jack showing up, absorbing the divinity of God. And in a moment where they could have killed Chuck, I haven't been saying Chuck the whole time. Why didn't y'all tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Chuck. Okay, Chuck. In the midst of Chuck being normal, they decide, we're not going to kill you, but we're going to let you live out the rest of your days as a normal human being. Jack goes off to then operate in the position of God, a powerful moment where he says, well, they ask him, well, are you God now? He simply responds by saying, well, I'm me. Playing off of the biblical moment in Genesis where he tells he tells his sons and daughters, I am that I am. And so that is a known name between the Jews as to God's name. So that's extremely powerful that they portrayed that in that moment that way. But Jack takes over that role. God is no longer a threat, and even more so, Jack basically resets everything, making things the way that they were before. And that, my friends, is the series of Supernatural. But I want to review some things from this arc here that, in one sense, I will speak of it as a concern, but in another sense, I want to highlight something that I think is key, that, again, they don't make evident until the end of the series, which could be a writing issue, not knowing how they wanted to do things up until that point. It could have been their plan to make you feel that way, make you feel frustrated all the way up to this point. Who knows? That's just some couple of things to keep in mind. So, here's what I want to get to, right? This concept of God being evil was frustrating the entire time of watching it. It's like, why would y'all do this? Why would you make a mockery of God to this extreme, that you would make God come across this way to people? And it's even more frustrating because it's like, now you're just fulfilling the desires of man in illustrating God in this way. But here's what I came to, because I don't want to try and speak too much on something like this and not really give my full opinion. This is my real opinion about what happened. God isn't God. Chuck is not God in this show. Okay? That's something that I believe and theorize to be the case with what's happened here. Chuck is not God. Now you may be asking me, why do I say that? Here's why I say that. I believe that Chuck represents two things. He represents, one, how people believe God should be. Two, he represents everything that people hate of the nature of God, or hate that they think that they understand of the nature of God. So he embodies all of that, which is why he is exactly, in fact, so frustrating, and not an actual representation of the true nature of the true and living God. So that's something that I think changes the game for this show, okay? Is that Chuck is not actually God. That's why he's a little G. That's why he's a little G, folks. Because he ain't representing God properly. I'm going to tell you that right now. He's not properly representing God. Okay, here's what builds on this theory even more. One, with the two brothers, they have perspectives of God in the beginning of the series. Sam is one that would pray to God, unbeknownst to his brother and even more so his father, but Sam believed that God exists. Sam has some level of faith in the existence of God, and even more so God's part in, their successes and their battles. He's already believed that in the beginning of the series. However, Dean, as depicted by Eric Kripke and others who coordinated the creation of the series, Dean doesn't believe what he doesn't see. Now, you may question that from the point of, well, he didn't know about monsters until they manifested themselves, so why can't he believe in God in the same light? True, but even then, those things are manifesting themselves before him, so then he's convinced of their existence and follows accordingly. Even more so, deems that representation of, if God does exist, God isn't doing what I expect God should be doing, hence why I don't believe in God. So where, again, Sam is seeing God and believing God is doing things for them, Dean, if God is real, God's sucking right now and failing me. So that's where you get those perspectives represented in the two characters of Sam and Dean, manifested in Chuck himself. So that's a deep and powerful message that I want to point out. So if that is the case, they are manifesting for them that as long as you have this perspective of God, of course God is going to be what you perceive God to be, or this perverted version of who God truly is. So it is going to cause problems for you in your life. It is going to cause problems for you and your perspective on religion. It is going to cause problems for you to actually, instead of having an expectation or a perspective of God, you're not pursuing God for who he is. You don't want to know who God truly is. I mean, I want to think about this for those that don't believe in God that is watching this, right? If you don't believe in God, okay, fine. But you are doing what you don't want anyone that you enter into a relationship to do to you. You don't want them to tell you, hey, this relationship isn't working because I don't like this perspective of you, right? That's one thing that would frustrate you if someone broke up with you just because they don't like who you are. Now, in some sense, for some people, it's just like, okay, well, fine, I'll find someone that does. The thing is, God's doing the same thing. God's doing the same thing. God's saying, hey, I love each and every one of you guys, but I understand if you don't want to place your faith in me, give me your love, where I have loved you, I've been there for you, I always will be there for you. But if you don't want me, fine. I will continue to operate through those that do love me. But I'm still coming back to make sure that with every opportunity given, that you are being shown who I truly am. Come to know me and you'll fall in love with me. I promise you. Like that's how God's operating, man. It's beautiful. The truth of who God is beautiful. And the truth of who God is at some level is given near the end here at season 15. I believe it's episode 19 with the character of Jack. So with Jack absorbing the power of God, just to clarify, this is that point where God had fused with his sister, and thus when Jack absorbed the power of God, he also absorbed the sister, and he illustrates that we are operating in harmony. And so Sam and Dean are questioning him, and they're saying like, well, hey, are you still gonna hang with us? You're gonna come hang at the hangout? You're gonna come chill with us, drink beer, this, that, and the third. He's like, I'll be there, but I won't be there. Like, I'm going to exist. I'm gonna be around you. Everyone knows I'm around them. He goes as far as to say even more so, and I'm totally paraphrasing, but I believe it's beautifully said. He's like, that I am in everyone. Whether or not they trust that I'm there with them is up to them, but I am there with them. I'm here for everyone. And the issue that came up is, and the thing that Chuck did wrong, was that Chuck put himself in the story. And so, although that's an arguable statement in essence, the context of what he is saying is God became what the people expected God to be, or what people hated God to be. He basically points out my theory in that moment. That moment is when everything started to click for me. Was like, that's why Chuck ain't a big E. That's why Chuck's lowercase. Jack is now embodying the essence of who God truly is. I'm sure we can go back and forth about what is a Nephilim. It's an abomination. That's not of God. They need to be destroyed. Sure, okay, I agree with you on that. But the essence of God actually being in the story is more powerful, because now people have an opportunity to truly know God in the way that God intended. And that's what I believe. In their own way, without crossing any lines or crossing people, they're trying to say that without saying it, is what I think is taking place here at this point. Now, that being said, I want to end this video on this note. There's no Jesus in the entirety of Supernatural.
What?
Now, there's no context for that. Even more so, the creator, Eric Kripke, expresses that he doesn't believe in God. It's a nice idea, at least for what he did for the series. Again, he left us at the end of season 5 as a creator and contributor to the story. But he himself doesn't believe in God. So, you know, one, for there to be a lack of God, of course, there's going to be a lack of Jesus. But in them illustrating this story the way that they did, and I suspect, I've seen no confirmation of this, they might have had a hard time trying to illustrate God, which is why they did this the way that they did. They don't fully grasp how can we properly illustrate God in this. We can't properly illustrate God in this, right? I mean, that's a trope of comic books. A trope of comic books is to know that God is there, but not make God apply himself. Marvel does it through the One Above All, where the One Above All has created all things, is just watching everything do what they do and is not putting his hands in it. Whereas DC has what's known as the Presence, where he's also created all things, but he's not a very hands-on entity throughout the entirety of DC. So it's interesting that they depict it that way to, I would say, safeguard against blaspheming him in any way, shape, or form. So they try not to touch on him too much. The same thing can be said about Jesus. I would say they probably didn't know how to incorporate Jesus into the story. But that being said, it says a lot as to how God is depicted here if there is no Jesus. That's another concept of Chuck. If Chuck is who Chuck is, if Chuck is anything close to a uppercase G, the reason he's lacking is because there's no Jesus and no Holy Spirit. The two that are a part of the third that makes up the entire Trinity. If they're not involved, of course you're going to get someone like Chuck. You're only going to get judgment. You're only going to get, I'm going to do what I want. But you need the Trinity to manifest the true essence of God in a storyline, especially if you want to do it right. And since they lacked Jesus, since they lacked the Holy Spirit, that's where they were not able to go to that extent with the story. But I think it's interesting the way that they ended it, using Jack to finally represent in some essence the true nature of God. Again, thank you all for joining me on this journey reviewing the series of Supernatural. And if you have, again, any questions, comments, or feedback that you'd like to leave for me, please leave that in the comments. Hit that like button if you like what you got from this video, as well as go ahead and give me a follow. Thank you guys, and y'all have a blessed evening. Peace.